Азимут 50, высота 2000 метров.
At 9:47 p.m., a Ukrainian Su-27 lifted from a forward operating strip near Kryvyi Rih, its twin engines pushing a column of heat into the night. The mission brief was brutally simple. Destroy a Russian artillery coordination node hidden deep inside the Donbas lowlands. Satellite intercepts showed that this single facility had directed more than 30 rocket salvos in the past week. The order tonight was not to disrupt it, but to erase it. The pilot, call sign Veer, climbed through 2,000 feet, staying inside a narrow corridor of radio silence. His radar stayed dark, his transponder cold. Only the faint glow of the HUD cut through the cockpit's blackness. Behind him, a pair of AGM-88 HARM missiles hung under wing, their seekers sleeping, waiting for a hostile radar beam like wolves waiting for a scent. But the Russians were already awake. 70 kilometers east, an early warning station near Debaltseve caught a faint radar reflection, small, erratic, vanishing between sweeps. Not enough for classification, but enough to alert the crews of an S-300 battery dug into a forested ridge. Power surged through the system. Hydraulic actuators lifted the launchers. The flap-lid radar rotated toward the noise and the static. Inside the Su-27, a warning tone cracked to life. A single rising beep, then another. Not a lock. Not yet. But a search beam had found him. Veer steadied his breathing, pushed the throttles forward and slid lower, letting the terrain swallow him whole. Hills rose like dark shoulders on either side of the valley ahead. At this altitude, he was no longer flying above the earth. He was threading it. He had 18 minutes until weapons release. If he survived that long. The valley tightened around him like a collapsing throat. Trees blurred into a continuous black wall on both sides as the Su-27 dropped to 120 feet. At this altitude, even a shallow bank could become fatal. But the terrain masking worked. The radar warning tone softened, then faded completely. For 15 seconds, the sky was silent. Then the S-300 battery adapted. A secondary radar, lower power, broader beam began sweeping the valley mouths. It wasn't meant to guide missiles. It was meant to flush prey. Veer's threat receiver caught its signature instantly. A coarse, dirty pulse pattern that didn't fix on him but felt its way forward like fingertips groping in the dark. "Damn," he muttered. Not that anyone could hear. The pulse hit him again. Not a lock, but a vector. The Russians were triangulating. They didn't need a perfect track, just enough to cue the real hunters. The warning tone snapped into a shrill, continuous scream. Missile launch, bearing 081, range 38 kilometers. The S-300's 5 V-55 missile climbed from the tree line in a rising spiral, accelerating past Mach 4. Veer's skin prickled with cold sweat. At this range, he had 22 seconds. He punched chaff, pulled into a high G brake, and dove into the terrain. The Su-27 shuddered violently as the wings bit into the cold night air. The missile's seeker locked onto the first return, his decoy cloud, then corrected, realizing the echo was fading. It screamed downward, adjusting its vector. Veer slammed the jet behind a rocky outcrop, a maneuver only possible because he had memorized every contour of the digital terrain map before launch. The missile detonated on the ridgeline, a sphere of white fire swallowing rocks, trees, and empty air. Shrapnel rattled against the Su-27's fuselage like thrown gravel. He survived the first shot, but the Russians never fired just one. Far ahead, his target waited, and between them, more SAM belts waking from their slumber. Veer steadied the aircraft at 300 feet, engine temperatures creeping upward, warning lights flickering from the strain of the evasive dive. A deep, metallic vibration rolled through the frame, subtle but unmistakable. The jet had taken damage, even if the instruments couldn't identify where yet. His breathing slowed. His pulse did not. He crossed the next ridgeline, and the landscape opened into a broad industrial valley. Abandoned warehouses, rusted rail spurs, and the skeletal remains of an old coal plant stretched across the darkness. Somewhere within that maze sat the Russian node. Satellite uplinks, artillery fire control radars, and digital command relays buried under earth and concrete. But before he could reach them, the Russians made their next move. A Buk-M2 battery hidden in the ruins powered up. Veer's receiver caught the spike instantly. Clean, sharp, professional. The Buk radar was not searching. It had already found him. Lock. Bearing 134. Altitude matched. Range 22 kilometers. The launch was immediate. 29M317 missiles rose in parallel arcs, their exhaust plumes glowing like twin comets. They separated, splitting into a pincer geometry designed to kill maneuvering fighters. One climbed high for a top-down intercept. The other dove into the valley, hunting from below. Veer had 12 seconds. He killed his lights, rolled the Su-27 knife edge, and dropped to 90 feet, skimming the cracked asphalt of an abandoned rail yard. He fired a flare burst, then another. Brilliant magnesium orbs carving white scars into the night. The low missile corrected first, its seeker confused by the sudden bloom of heat signatures. It veered toward a flare, detonating in a violent cone of fragmentation. The high missile was smarter. It dove, adjusting continuously, predicting Veer's next move with cold machine logic. The Su-27's frame groaned as he pulled into a brutal brake turn. G-forces crushed his ribcage. His vision tunneled. The missile passed 30 meters behind him, close enough to make the cockpit flash white from the proximity blast. Hydraulic pressure dipped. Control stiffness increased. The jet was bleeding. But he was still alive. And now only 7 minutes from the target. The Su-27 limped into the final approach vector, flying dangerously low, so low the downwash kicked dust clouds across abandoned farmland. Every control input felt delayed, mushy. Something in the right hydraulic line was broken, bleeding pressure with every maneuver. But radar emissions ahead told him the Russians were unaware of the damage. They were preparing to kill him with full confidence. A short-range Tor-M2 system activated near the target compound, its search radar sweeping in tight, clinical pulses. Unlike the S-300 or Buk, the Tor was built to ambush low-flying attackers exactly like him. Its missiles needed only 5 seconds of guidance before going autonomous. 5 seconds he likely didn't have. Veer armed his harms and waited for the radar to tighten its beam. He needed the Tor to commit, to paint him as a target. Without that, the missiles would have nothing to home on. The Tor operator obliged. The beam narrowed. The lock solidified. Veer fired. 2 AGM-88s dropped, their seekers immediately screaming toward the hostile emitter. The Tor crew tried to shut down, but the harms had captured the pulse pattern. They didn't need a live signal anymore. They remembered. Both missiles struck the radar mast in a single coordinated punch. A column of flame erupted skyward. Debris rained across the compound. Now the Russians were blind. The strike. With the air defenses collapsing, Veer climbed to 1,200 feet, just enough to give his remaining ordnance the glide angle needed. His target pod painted the coordinates, a bunker complex disguised under the shell of an abandoned textile mill. He released 2 precision glide bombs. They drifted outward, wings unfolding, adjusting silently. The first penetrated the decoy structure. The second hit the bunker's true entrance. And the earth convulsed. A shockwave rolled through the valley, lifting dust and shattered brick like a rising storm. Secondary explosions followed. Ammo stacks, fuel drums, server racks, all erupting in staggered flashes that turned night into a strobe of violent orange. The artillery node was gone, not disrupted, erased. The exit via turned west, engine temperature spiking into the red. Fuel remaining. 310 kilograms, barely enough. The jet vibrated as if pieces wanted to fall away. But no radar tracked him now. No missiles rose from the horizon. The valley that had hunted him only hours earlier now felt empty, hollow. 34 minutes later, the forward strip's landing lights blinked twice in the dark. He touched down hard. The right gear nearly collapsed, the aircraft rolling to a crooked stop. Ground crews sprinted toward the jet as the canopy opened and cold night air flooded the cockpit. Veer exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The mission log would later reduce the night to timestamps and coordinates. But those inside the valley knew the truth. One aircraft had flown into a corridor built to kill it, and returned after turning the enemy's silence into ashes.